Hello, and thank you for joining me for another episode of What Saith the Crooked Nose. Today, I'm talking to another special Elite Mentorship Forum alum. Sam had reached out to me after she saw my episode with Sue Parrott, right? She is apparently quite close to Sue and thought that we could have some really interesting and fun conversations around, what she does as far as, helping people with workplace friction and really see how her specific modality can really help people who want to find maybe a little bit more flow, maybe a little bit more harmony in their life, in their workplace, and ultimately, be happier because of it. Isn't that kind of the point? So I'm really excited to have this conversation with Sam. Buckle up, as normal. Please go ahead and smash that like button. Go ahead and comment on anything that, maybe we didn't get into or define as much as you wish, that we would have. Maybe we did a flyby. You aren't quite sure exactly what we were getting at, or comment and let us know what you loved. Yeah, let us know. Hey, maybe you find disagreement. Hey, cool. Nothing wrong with that. Let's figure out, how we can make our ideas better through the input of yours. And go ahead and share this as well. And I suspect you're going to find an incredibly interesting conversation, right? Just go ahead and tune in. Sound good? Awesome. All right, Sam Panter, thank you so much for joining me. For those who don't know Sam, right? Sam is the owner and operator of, I had to write it down because I can't pronounce the name, Changing the Tides. And she's going to be able to share with what the actual name is. It sounds fascinating already. So owner and operator Changing the Tides with roles where she provides guidance and support in navigating the minefield surrounding workplace friction. It allows for greater understanding and harmony moving forward. This will allow others and those companies to set higher standards when enacting new policies and procedures, which sounds incredibly beneficial because policies and procedures, in and of themselves are can produce a lot of friction, right? You're really kind of taking a piece out of what people don't really stop and think about, and then you're putting it on paper so it can be reproduced, but that's not necessarily how people will intuitively get into their workplace flow. And I'm curious, well, one, can you please pronounce the proper name of your business?
Absolutely. It's in the Haida Kill language, and it's the southern dialect of Haida Gwaii. So how you pronounce changing the tide is Quatlagatla.
Okay.
And I actually had to practice
Yeah.
how
Well,
to
and
say
my tongue just doesn't work that way, especially with the words and the way that it's spelled. It confuses me, which is actually makes it a little bit more fun.
yeah. It's a very different language in how you speak it. It's similar to like German because it's very guttural. It's very much in your throat. And then your tongue has to work in a very different way to get the pronunciations of certain words. So I totally understand it. I love when people attempt it. It makes my heart smile. That was a big part for me moving forward with my business because my indigenous background has never been at the forefront
Mm.
of what it is I'm doing. And I was sitting with what can I do in regards to decolonization, repatriation, and reconciliation within myself, because you can't be at the forefront of those issues if you're not doing it in yourself already. So it was like, how do I stand in integrity within this? So I was like, everywhere I can, I incorporate the language, the traditions, the teachings as much as I can. And I actually have my own cultural advisor in developing and working with the language as well. And she actually happens to be my soul sister. So it works out beautiful.
Oh, that's awesome. And is that somebody that we might know, or is that partner, like a business partner of yours?
No, she's not a business partner. Just we went to high school together, and
Oh,
yeah, she's not a part of this circle, but she actually went to get her teaching degree, and then she also worked with at home on Skidegate in Haida Gwaii. There's a program called the Skidegate Haida Immersion Program.
mhm.
And this is where all the elders get together and they actually revitalize the language because a few years back, there was only 21 fluent speakers. and they saw this as a problem. And so they started to gather at a longhouse at home and started to record the languages. And now they actually sit together and they develop and modernize the actual Haida language, which is so
Mm,
beautiful. And yeah, it's amazing the work that they're doing. And so there was a group, I think there was 12 or 14 of them, Erica included, who went through and got their teaching degree, because you can't teach in the schools with the traditional languages unless you have a teaching degree.
mhm.
So there's all these complications and things, and yeah, it's beautiful to see the revitalization, and it just shows the resiliency, and that's what I lean on a lot with my work. And so it's beautiful. And the other part of why I wanted to work with policies and procedures and businesses and that is because I find everyone's just looking for this check mark.
Mhm.
Like, I did this webinar, check. I have a certificate, check. Now I can go back to doing what I'm doing. And it doesn't work that way. Once, and it's shown that once your mind is expanded, that's it. There is no constriction. It's once you expand and you move forward with that, then you've changed. You have physically changed and you've altered your how your brain works.
Mhm.
And yes, it can morph and it can change, but I think we just become better liars when we don't want to change, and we just get really good at lying to ourselves, which, as we know, increases your feedback of when you're out of alignment. And so what does that look like? And so what I wanted to start doing is working with those things and saying, where can we put in the substance? Where can we put the integrity back into business? And what does that look like in supporting diverse and minority groups?
Well, and as you were describing, right? That's that magician energy, right? That archetype coming out. That's well, let me tell you this most brilliant idea of why you don't necessarily need to change and why you are totally fine and it's totally okay for you to, to be in the, maybe at the rut or maybe in a place of stagnation. But hey, other people are doing it too, and how bad could it be? And then we take a step back and be like, oh, well, other people are also following groupthink. Other people are also doing things that aren't necessarily, good for them or good for their culture or good, for their family. And I love the idea of modernizing a language, especially one that, arguably could be on the brink of death, right? Because language itself evolves. And if it's evolving, well, then it becomes much more alive. And if it's alive, well, then a living language is much less susceptible to, to death and going away.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're putting out materials all the time of like glossaries and books and that. And so I've been working with Erica and I'm like, where else can I add this? And I created this core part of my business, and the term, and if you want to attempt it, I encourage you to do so, but if you don't want to, that's okay. It's Squansing Kuga, and
Quantsing Kuga?
Squansing Kuga.
Quantsing Kuga. Okay,
It's pretty
maybe,
close. Nice.
maybe.
It's a little bit better than Quetzalcoatl for
Yeah.
sure. Um, but what that translates to is heart first. So
Mm,
what does being heart first look like? And so where I'm leaning with my business and my teachings is getting in more to your emotional intelligence. So what is your emotional connection to these things? Because as we know, through the layers of understanding, we start with the intellectual, we move into the emotional, and then it becomes an identity.
mhm.
So I started looking at all these conversations around DEI, and it's now DEIB. So it's belonging is the B now. And I started looking at all these things, and it's like, okay, well, there's all these webinars, there's all these things, all these businesses looking for check marks and that. And I actually have it on my website that if you're looking for a check mark, swipe left, I'm not your girl. And I just wanted to kind of play with that a little bit because I
Yeah, that's
love
funny. I like
sprinkling
that.
humor in, yeah, wherever I can. And so I was thinking, emotionally, where are we coming from when we operate from these things? And when we can connect to those, then that's where real change starts to occur. That's where real shifting on a big scale occurs. And then it becomes just that little extra hop step into identity, because our emotional things are what block us from so many things, be it wealth, be it abundance, be it health. Health is huge. Our non-negotiables that we have in life. And if you're emotional, if you're emotionally immature trying to work in these areas, you're always going to come up against friction of sorts or blocks or resistance. And then you have so much force within yourself that it's just easier, because we always take the path of least resistance. That's just who we are. We're hardwired for it. Because I was listening to something and it was saying how energy is the most precious resource that our body views. So it will always put it into a category of protection. And how can we expend as least amount of energy as possible? And so when you look at energy as our primary fuel and resource that our body thinks is very precious, it's always going to put us in a path of least resistance. Where can I expend my least amount of energy? And you kind of think about it as that's like a superpower, because we're always going to lean into our resourcefulness. But that is also viewed through a lens of, well, I don't want to do it because I'm lazy. And that's what the cultural belief is around it. But it's not. It's actually a catalyst for resourcefulness.
Yeah, I like that, right? One man's laziness and another man's efficiency. And, this idea of the path of least resistance, I wonder if perhaps, at least for me and the way my mind works, that I see is the mind's going to go in a way in which it perceives the path of least resistance, because we don't always know, right? We think that we know better often. And, it makes me think of even little things, like when I was like a kid growing up and I wanted to, I couldn't quite reach for the remote control for the TV. I'm like flopping my arm. And I don't want to get off the bed. And I'm like leaning and doing all this stuff where I could have literally taken a half a second, gotten up, grabbed it. So I probably did 10 times more effort just to try to get it, in order to be like, hey, look at me, I didn't get up, because I decided that getting up was harder than actually, flopping around. So I expend a whole lot more energy. And then even to bigger things like, I was in the army, I didn't really take the time to think about like, hey, no matter how much I may disagree with some guy screaming at me, telling me what to do, I put myself here willingly. And so what happened was it made it seem easier for me just to, stand there and kind of fold my arms like a toddler. It's like, no, I don't want to do it. Right. And it certainly made my life a heck of a lot harder. And so I see that conservation of energy as a primary law, but the brain doesn't know the difference between imagination and reality. And that's where things can get a little squirrely. Yeah.
And this is the beautiful part. This is the other part I really bring out through my teachings as well, is dichotomy. Dichotomy is ever present. And I do a practice I call free flow writing.
Mm-hmm.
And dichotomy always comes up. And I remember, because I communicate with my guides when I do it, my heart and soul and connection. And I have lots of ancestors with me that support me, which is beautiful. And so when I do my free flow writing, I'll have a guide come in, and then, the pen kind of takes over, the writing physically changes. It's such an amazing practice. I love it. and and then I remember doing this one where I'm like, oh, look, dichotomy yet again. Here it is. Seriously. And I was kind of sarcastic with it. And my guide was like, well, yeah, of course it's going to come up again. It's where dichotomy is, so is your divinity. And your divinity is ever present. So why wouldn't the dichotomy show up? There is always a balance of light and dark. I mean, the symbols of yin yang has been around since forever. There's truth to it. Truth is what always survives, and it always comes through. And so when now I chuckle whenever someone talks about, well, it's both sides. And I'm like, well, yeah, of course it is. It's dichotomy. And that's where I believe the greatest gift that we were ever given was our free will. We always have the power to choose. What do you want? And I find every breath is on our personal growth journey is that choice. What do you choose? And I found this is probably one of the most powerful ones. And maybe it wasn't as like highlighted in Peter's teachings of USM, which was week 9. And it always sticks out in my mind. And it was called the binary equation. And it was his podcast he did of Voices in the Dark. And they talked about the binary equation of fear and love and the corridors. And the second that you choose fear, which is stepping down the corridor of fear, is every decision you make from then on is fear-based. But if you step down the corridor of love, every decision you make will be love-based, which is courage. And then if we look at um, the levels of consciousness from Dr. David R. Hawkins, is love is in that creative phase. It's constructive, it's building, it's expansive. And when you look at fear, it's in the destructive. So you're not going to build anything. And so when you think about it, when you base decisions on fear, it's always destructive. Nothing works. Nothing. It's like you start to build and you get all this energy going, and then all of a sudden it just goes, and it's like building a sandcastle on the beach, and you're getting mad at the tide, and it's like, well, yeah, you built it where the tide and the water are going to come up,
Right.
start dissolving in that. So where can you choose to build instead? You know. So it's looking at all these decisions and where you're coming from, and I love Neil Donald Walsh. I'm a raving fan of his, and he puts it as, what is the sponsoring emotion? You know, we can act what we think is a courageous or loving act, but if it's sponsored in, this is obligation, if I don't do this, I'm not going to get, well, when you look at that, that's fear-based. It's a lower expression. So you might think you're doing a loving act, but what is it sponsored in? And that's taking the deeper look into things, which I love. I love going deep, as deep as I can go. And that's probably why I'm stepping into an arena that is very chaotic and very charged. And there's lots of emotions of, I put it as, when you start having DEI conversations, the majority are looking at it as like, well, I've been sitting at an ample table with a 15-course meal, and now you're saying I have to invite somebody to my table, and now I'm going to have less. But I mean, what dinner have you been to where there's been a crowd of people coming and someone walked away hungry?
Yeah.
I've never experienced that. Because when you open up the table and you open up the conversation, you actually have more, because they're bringing in something that you never even thought of. And so I put it as, how many businesses are leaving money on the table because their biases are getting in the way of seeing the amazing perspective that somebody else could have, the beautiful gifts, the medicine. I call it medicine inside you. So what is the medicine inside you that you're going to give to somebody who needs it, that they don't even know how sick they are until they receive your medicine, and then they start healing, and then the ripples, you know, of what it can create, I think is just stunning.
Well, there's a lot of parallels what you're talking about, right? This idea of a dichotomy in everything to say the Kabbalion, where there's the principle of polarity, right? There's polarity in everything, right? You got a positive and a negative. It doesn't mean that's good or bad. Negative is traditionally looked at as feminine, right? Which allows things to happen, which draws things to it. And the positive is what goes out there and what's charged, right? The negative or the feminine is what holds the space for that fire to transform the world. And I see that you are a medicine of the feminine. And when you look at medicine of the feminine, do you see it in the same way of that of that energy that is, because gender is in all things, right? There's feminine energy in me, there's masculine energy in you.
Absolutely. And again, going back to the yin yang symbol, it shows how there's a little of each in both.
Yeah.
And there has to be. Life is all about balance. Everything is looking for, and we learned it because I'm a registered massage therapist as well. So I went to school for 4 years to to get that education and that career going. And we were taught how everything is looking for homeostasis, which is everything is in perfect balance. And so when things get out of balance, your body will do absolutely everything it possibly can to get it back into balance. And it's going to do things that probably aren't healthy for you, but all it cares about is that homeostasis, returning home. And what does that look like? And I find hypertension, when we went to school, was the best example for it. How when your blood pressure starts rising and the body does certain things to correct it, it will pull calcium out of your bones and dump it into your bloodstream to help chemically balance it out, to help bring it back down. But I put it as, it's like a video game though. You only have so many free lives, and then it's like, big crisis will happen.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you see this in the work that you do as well, right? So it's like you have all these free plays, free plays, free plays, and then the body goes, okay, I'm done. Like I'm at my max. I can't do anything anymore because now we're going to throw more systems out of balance.
Hmm.
So guess what? You're going to have a heart attack because you need to wake up and realize that I've been talking to you and now I'm screaming at you and now I have no voice. So I'm done. And there you go. You drop and have a heart attack. And
Mm.
it's amazing how the body works for us. And we sometimes get so cranky of my body's failing me. Are you kidding? You're failing your body
Yeah.
because you haven't been listening to it whispering. You haven't been listening to it talking to you. You waited until it screamed and threw a temper tantrum and walked out of the room. Then all of a sudden you go, well, what the hell?
Well, I mean, so what's so interesting about that is it brings to mind this quote that I've, surrounded myself with for a long time. It's from Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? Famous astrophysicist. Those who know how to think are empowered far beyond those who know only what to think. And the paradigm that we live in right now, especially in our education system, is all about what to think. Hey, you need to think this exact what. Kids go around looking so proud of themselves that like, hey, I know the capital of Delaware, as if that actually means something, right? Rather than, hey, I built this robot, I cooked this meal, right? I baked this cake. I actually did something tactile, but instead, no, I checked a box, right? Coming back to kind of your language there, just looking to check boxes. And it really
Yeah.
is the way in which it seems that we're groomed and our culture operates, which is unfortunate. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it goes back to where you can keep searching for knowledge and sound pretty smart and impress a few people of like, oh wow, she knows a lot.
Yeah.
And or you can show up and share wisdom. And I like to think of it as I love blowing up brains. I'll share an insight. And I mean, for most of EMF, I was sitting there in the community calls and stuff, and I'm just like, oh my god, that lesson just.
Yeah.
If you ask Sue, that was primarily me. I was always like, oh my god, and yeah, I love it. So I love when I can say something and it not really feel profound or different. It's just me sharing a perspective or um, a different approach and insight. And someone just sits there and goes, I I think I have to think on this for a little while. Like I had a conversation with someone and it was like 45 minutes. And after the conversation, she was like, okay, Sam, I think I need to like either lay down or go for a walk in nature after talking to you.
That's
And I
funny.
was like, thank you. That's probably the biggest compliment I could receive. So
Yeah. Yeah, getting somebody outside of their natural paradigm, their natural way of thinking, and getting them to look at something in a new perspective, not in a way that forces them, hey, get out of here, get off your duff and go think, but to invite them, right? I had a conversation, on this podcast with one of my family members in EMF 17, not actual, blood family, but became my family, Otis. And Otis Best, he was telling me about a story about when he was with his son. And here's this guy driving a beer truck and looks miserable and trying to offload all the merchandise. And Otis just turns to his son and says, hey, look at that guy. Does he look happy to you? And his son was like, no, not at all. And so it allowed them to have a conversation around just career, not like, hey, son, what are you going to do? Hey, are you getting good grades? And really like beating him over the head. And apparently, this is something that Otis just kind of let go, just had this conversation, just trying to be a dad, just trying to invite higher wisdom. And when his son graduated, well, he invoked that conversation and how meaningful it was for him. And so just to, like you said, show up with that wisdom, because that wisdom is going to find its nook for it to start to take root. And higher wisdom, I mean, it has to be discovered, which is why, because if it's not, and we're just trying to force somebody into it, well, then that's where we're casting pearls, amongst swine. Doesn't mean that the swine in this case are bad. It just means that they're not ready to receive it because they need to find it first.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of my patients, he taught me this beautiful saying, and I use it all the time now, is detachment with love.
Mm,
I can give everyone love, but I don't get attached to that with an expectation.
yeah.
I'm just showing up as myself, giving love because that's all I can control anyways. The only thing I have any sort of power and control in is within myself.
Yeah.
And River, she was in our EMF 12, and her and I talk all the time. We were not assigned buddies, so we had this joke that we were secret buddies.
Nice.
and we really held space for each other for the entire EMF, and we still talk on a regular basis, sometimes multiple times in a day. And we always talk about how the second that you step outside of yourself, you've already lost.
Mm,
So for me, that means if I'm walking along and I started my day with a high energy and I'm smiling and laughing and someone comes along and says something that kind of bothers me a little bit, I've immediately, in that second of me being bothered, my mood changed. I've lost my power. I've already lost the game. I've stepped outside of myself. And so with the EMF and the teachings and that, I took it as, how can I observe what's happening outside of me, yet turn the lens and go, where is that resonating within me? Because nothing will resonate within you that you're not connected to.
mm,
So there's something outside of me that's bothering me. And all it is a reflection of what's happening inside of me that I can't see. So it's helping me to see my blind spot. And so every time, if you're looking at that, instead of judging it, just observing it and going, that's interesting. I wonder why that's bothering me. And the lens turns, and then you start looking on yourself. And then that's when I go into asking questions of myself. Because as we know, the questioning will change my focus. Instead of going, oh, that asshole, blah, 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 or whatever, I
Yep.
can't believe he cut me off in traffic. And then it's to go, well, why would that bother me? Why is their reckless behavior bothering me?
Right.
I remember being reckless, and I remember cutting someone off
Right.
yesterday.
Exactly.
I wonder
Yeah.
what they said about me or what they thought about me. And then it's to go, yeah, I could see being in that mind frame of something bothering me so deeply that I'm distracted while driving and I might come across as reckless. And then you just start, unraveling, so to speak. And like I said, I like going deep, and I have a spiritual mentor, and I'll, text her insights and stuff. And she goes, that's good. What else is there?
Yeah.
Go a little deeper. And it's to go deeper every time and push yourself every time, because then you realize that you actually haven't reached the bottom at all.
Well, the deeper
There is
you
no
go,
bottom.
yeah, the deeper you go, the deeper it is, right? The deeper you go, the further you fall, right? And I like this idea of, if I see something in my outer world, well, there's something happening in my inner world, right? As above, so below. So, as below, so above. And, I have, with the aid of, Peter's program, right, the EMF, as well as, USM, the Ultimate Self Mastery, and just, Alan Watts, Jordan Peterson, just listening to the Tao Te Ching as often as I do, it really helped me look at things outside of a very simplistic narrative. Like, say, for instance, the Bible should be taken literally. That is incredibly simplistic because it's just not the way that people share wisdom. We don't share wisdom in a literal fashion. We share wisdom metaphorically and through stories. And so when I started allowing myself to look at, the Bible that way, and I'm not the biggest fan of the Bible, but I'm a pretty big fan of Jesus. I think Jesus is pretty cool. And he has this line that a lot of people just kind of see as a throwaway line. Hey, Sam, judge not lest ye be judged. Well,
Mm.
what does that mean? Does that mean that Sam is going to judge me? I mean, who gives a shit? Like, for real, who cares if you're judging me? Like, is that gonna keep me from putting food on my table? Is that gonna keep me from waking up happy if I decide that I want to? Um, what the wisdom there is getting at, as I see it, is the second that you judge somebody, you are now securing that feeling within yourself, because we cannot view the world except from a place of who we are. And so that is a warning that as you're judging, you are basically casting spells upon yourself, and you're accepting this judgment on yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And then all the limiting beliefs that go along with that judgment.
Yeah.
Of what that looks like. And then we attach it with the I am, which we know is the most powerful statement that you can make about yourself. And so it's the who are you? Who are you really?
Right.
And I've been dabbling in my free flow, and I haven't had enough courage yet to really go in there, but I'm starting to write, like, who are you? Why are you here? What's the purpose? And not so much what's the purpose, but what is the medicine inside you that you're being guided to give? So what does that fully look like? Because I feel like I have all these things that I'm working on, but what I realized yesterday, which was such a beautiful aha moment, and I'm working with someone who is looking at having me as a professor on an online platform. And so
Nice.
we had this beautiful conversation because I sent out, these awesome courses that I wanted to do, and I was
Yeah.
feeling really good about it. And then he was kind of chipping away at them a little bit, but in a beautiful way. And
Mhm.
so I was like, okay, this is uncomfortable. Sit and receive. Just sit in it. It's okay. Your brain's gonna grow. This is beautiful. And so I was sitting in it, and then I realized by the time we got to the near the end of the conversation, it was, where are you in your teachings? And I realized out of safety, I actually built myself outside of it
Mm.
so that I couldn't be attacked, so that I could stay safe. What the hell is safe?
Yeah.
And so then I started asking those questions, and then I was like, nope, I don't want the answers yet.
I'm curious, have you, and if this is, sensitive, by all means, you don't need to answer it. But I'm curious, have you spent much time unpacking, you know, my need to build myself outside to feel safe? Is that Sam, or is that my indigenous heritage that's kind of through, just through a lot of the trauma and a lot of the need to, of others around you to define who you are and define your limitations. You can only live here. Oh, hey, there's resources under your feet. Well, you can't live there anymore, or we have more rights to it. And just this, this kind of cultural identity that's thrust upon people.
I think that's such a beautiful question, and thank you for asking. Um, I think if I were to give it the short answer, it's a combination of all.
Yeah.
But the other part is, and this is where my unique background comes from. So I am a two-spirited person, but I also have the saying of, I come from two worlds. So when I was growing up, I was living off reserve, and then I grew up on reserve. And then I loved my indigenous culture and heritage, and it was very culturally rich where I grew up. And then I was raised in a very organized religion that basically said, this is pagan and demonic, and you can't be a part of it if you're going to be over here.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about fracturing you as an individual. And so I used to always look at it as this, cross I had to bear,
Mm.
basically, for lack of a better word. And now through USM and EMF and Neil, like Neil Donald Walsh, like Conversations with God, those 3 book series changed my life in such a drastic way. That is what gave me the courage and the direction to reconcile my spiritual self.
Mm.
And I remember listening to book 2 and 3 and just bawling. Like, I'm sitting there puzzling. Puzzling is what I do to help process what's going on in my head.
Yeah.
And I remember puzzling, and I just had tears, and all of a sudden the puzzle pieces were getting wet. And I'm like,
Oh.
oh, I need a Kleenex, because I didn't even realize how much I was crying.
Yeah.
When you're crying so hard, you don't even feel the tears on your face until they drop or pool. And I mean, you don't have this problem. It pools in your bra, in case the ladies
Yeah,
will
I
know
don't I
that
don't often
feeling.
have that problem.
And it was just so incredibly healing. And I've listened to those books multiple times. And I think for the long-winded way is, I'm still in that space of figuring out what that is. And that's kind of what I've been shy about, because I've faced racism on both sides, like with non-Indigenous people and with Indigenous people. And it's really tough being in that space because you don't know where you belong. And so it's like you're of two worlds, but you're not a part of any of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, and where I've been is building a world between the worlds with bridges.
Yeah. Well,
And
and
so what does that look
coming back to your helping companies with policies and procedures. I mean, how often do we find that, that we do things without understanding why, right? From a young age, I would be asked, very what seem to be benign questions, but I see them as quite caustic. Hey, Josh, what do you want to be when you grow up? Oh man, I want to be a marine biologist. That's stupid. They don't make any money. Why would you do that? You should do what I think that you should do. Well, then what happens is I start doing what other people think, that because as soon as I have an idea, Eureka, this is a great idea. Well, I now have all this evidence, quote unquote, of people telling me that my ideas are stupid. Well, if my ideas are stupid, I'm going to immediately discount them. So then I'm going to do what other people do, or I'm going to do what I perceive other people think is good for me rather than what I think is good for me. Therefore, I probably have no idea why I even do what I do. So to break down those policies, procedures, hey, what is it that you do that's successful? Hey, how do we underline that? Hey, how do we recreate that? Hey, how do we help others who come in, who get onboarded, then, take that and be empowered by that?
Yeah. Well, and the other part of it too is there has to be a substance underneath it, because it's not enough to just have an invite to the table.
Mm.
Because and this is actually coming out and there's terminology for it, and I apologize, I do not remember the terminology for it. Excuse me. But it's like you're getting invited to the table and there's a little kid's table off to the side. Okay, you're in the room now. Shut up and be quiet.
Yeah.
Just be grateful.
Yeah.
And then, okay, now I have a seat at the table. Okay, yeah. I want you to be in the photos for the company and, do this and do that. And, oh, this day's coming out. So I experienced this. There's a day in Canada that's celebrated on September 30th, and it's called A Day of Truth and Reconciliation. And it's on Indigenous things. It was actually in the UN, it got passed. And so more and more things are coming through with it. And so what it is a day to reflect with colonization, residential schools, and starting to educate non-Indigenous peoples on the actual real history of Canada and what has occurred. So I did a blog post of how to be an authentic ally. So what can you do as a non-Indigenous person to support Indigenous peoples? And what does that look like? Like tangible, real things that you can do. And so I got the post sent out like 2 weeks before it needed to be published for September 30th. September 29th at 10 o'clock at night, I'm going, hey guys, are we running with this? I haven't gotten any feedback. I don't know what's happening. Oh yeah, we want to do it. Da, 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 da. I'm like, okay, so you want to do it. But there's been no conversation up until the night before it's supposed to go on your website. And I had to reach out to get this done. So get it done. Needless to say, it was what I call tokenism. So it's, we're going to pull you out when we need to, and then we're going to put you away. And then, people are wearing orange shirts for the acknowledgement of residential school, which is beautiful. I love it. But it's almost turned into this fad thing of, oh, here's the day. Let's, dust out our orange shirt and put it on. And like May 5th. So yesterday was a day to recognize Red Dress Day, which is the murdered, missing Indigenous two-spirited women and girls. And again, it's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to dust out my red dress and put it on for the day and reflect and think. And it's like, it should be every day, and I have the same policy with Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day is every day, every moment in your relationship with someone. It's just maybe you'd make a little extra effort, but wouldn't it be more amazing to show up on a random day just because they were on your mind and you thought of them and you picked this up and you're like, let's go do this.
Yeah.
because you've been on my mind. You were kind of haunting me in a great way.
I like
And I
that.
think you're friggin' sexy.
Right.
And yeah,
And
like,
hey, right.
yeah. And how much more does that feel versus to go, oh, it's Valentine's Day. I'm gonna get da 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 da. Da. And it's the same thing with these holidays. And I love the recognition, but again, is what is the substance underneath it? Why are you doing it? And if you ask a lot of people why they're doing it, more often than not, they don't know.
Well, sure. I mean, how can we? Because again, we're taught what to think. We're not taught how to think, right? And we're also taught what to think. Like, me, regardless of what sort of background I've had, regardless of the abuse I had to endure as a kid, regardless of the poverty I had to endure as a kid, right? I'm supposed to be some sort of paragon of privilege just simply because of the way that I look. Because we are so reductionist. While the people who have the most power may well be rich white people, that's like 0.01% of the entire population. And to judge the entire population, right? It's just like not every indigenous person is Geronimo, right? And to be like, oh, hey, you're indigenous, I should then lionize you and herald you, and or what if I just treated you like a person instead of dehumanizing you by putting you on a pedestal or by trying to demonize you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I think of with yeah, it's just I'm still a person at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I still squat down to take a pee. I put one pant leg on at a time. Like, we are no different. We have the same experiences, and I have this saying that I use in my teachings is the signals and the feedback are the same. The journey that we take is the uniqueness of our fingerprint.
Mm, mm.
Because why I came here and why you came here, we might have commonalities, but the journeys that we took, vastly different. But I bet the signals that we use to know when we were out of alignment and when we were in alignment and when things felt good and when things didn't feel good, we're the same.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're built of the exact same stuff. And what it really makes me think of, this map that I use, and we're taught as well, this idea that our souls, us, our true self, right? Not our avatar, but our true self, the soul, decided, hey, we have things that we need to learn in this lifetime, and we're going to start off by choosing our parents. And what I found so fascinating by that is, I grew up in Utah. I'm in Utah right now, and this is an idea that the LDS believe as well, and the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons,
Mhm.
and they I used to make fun of them so much, like, you're so picked. And so, but what I realize now is, let's say the map is inaccurate. Okay, well, so what? Right? Can you think of anything more empowering in your life than to think like, hey, why was I so strong that I realized that no matter what difficulties I was going to face, I was ready for it. This is the challenge I'm up to.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I call the medicine inside of us is, how can you give yourself that medicine? And this is what I love. Again, going back to Neil, like I said, I'm a kind of an obsessed fan. Um, he had this great saying in his book, and I kind of took it a little bit different of you cannot give what you do not have. And so I use the imagery of if someone comes up to me and asks for $5, well, I can hope and pray and be like, yeah, I if I had the $5, I would totally give it to you, and da, 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 da. But at the end of the day, if I do not have $5 in my wallet, I cannot give $5 away.
Mhm.
And the person that we forget the most often is ourselves. And so I love to use the imagery of self-love, self first is I picture a champagne tower. And how does a champagne tower get filled? You don't see the person going around to each cup and like running around this giant champagne tower. Is they go to the very top and they fill the first cup. And the effect, that cascading, that ripple effect fills every single cup in that tower. And not to the point where one's a little bit more full than the other. It's all the same, but it comes from the first cup first.
Mhm.
And so what I started to picture was me being the first cup in a champagne tower, and my wife and daughter on underneath, and then my mom, and then friends and patients, and all these people I work with, and all these different things. And I just started building this beautiful big tower. And now I don't even use a champagne bottle anymore. Now my champagne tower is massive, and it's under a waterfall,
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
that's how much self-love and the practices that I do that fill my cup. So then everyone only ever receives my overflow.
Mm.
And I get the feedback of when I'm not filling my cup and I'm pouring from it instead of allowing it to come from and through me. So when it's coming just from me and I'm pouring out of myself, it doesn't feel right anymore, because I've been practicing. So I understand when my soul is whispering to me versus shouting and screaming at me where it used to be, which was unhealthy. And that's what I term as being emotionally unwell, is when you are pouring from your cup to fill up somebody else's. And then again, it goes back to that. Then I'm sponsoring in resentment, because now it puts an expectation on them to give back to me.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I gave you something, now you give me something. And
Out
then
of
you come.
obligation, not out of love. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And then when they don't, and they run away and they do something, so then you have, different models of the world, and then you have stress, and then you have anxiety, and it just catapults into this really toxic cycle that you can get in, that's so unhealthy for you, and so out of alignment. And of course your feedback is just going to get stronger and stronger and stronger as you go. And it's just to stop and go, it's not on them. This is me. This is
Mhm.
my responsibility. I am responsible to myself first and foremost, period.
Yeah.
Because the second I step outside of myself, again, you lose your power.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what I love about your, idea, this metaphor of the champagne tower, you could even look at that as, whether it be, corporation, whether it be a government, culture starts from the top, that very first glass. And whatever's
Yep.
being poured in that very first glass is going to pour into every other cascading glass below. And, I look at this, I do spiritual healing, which, isn't perhaps the best modality for somebody who just got shot, right? Somebody who just broke their leg and needs to have it reset. That's probably a better place for you to go, to the hospital. But when it comes to chronic conditions, well, the culture that we've created starts at the top. Well, how does that, what's being poured into that first cup? Well, what's being poured in that first cup is a building that's created, bought and paid for by, large pharmaceutical companies. And then the next cup is that the doctors go and they go and learn from that. And so the only information that they're allowed to know what to think, not how to think, what to
Mm-hmm.
think, is you need to know what anatomy and what pill will affect that anatomy. Don't worry about if it messes up anything else underneath you in that cascading cup. That doesn't matter, because we've got another pill for that too. And
Yeah.
that's the business model. And
Yeah.
so whoever's underneath that first cup is very much akin to, a victim of that culture, a victim of that system. And I find it so unfortunate how we will look at, well, the doctor's prescribing me, bullshit, therefore he must be a bad person. No, not at all. In fact, he's graduating, he or she are graduating, and they're graduating with a student loan debt the size of a mortgage, but they've got no house. And so how do they pay that back? Well, they pay that back by shelling out these pills and being a pusher for these drug companies.
Well, and the system that they work within is broken.
Yep.
It's not the people within it, it's the system
Yep.
that the people are in. And it's not to say, you can't blanket term. There's some amazing, incredible doctors out there that are doing the best they can within the system, but we don't even realize the struggle and the fight that they're in just to maintain their license and do just enough, but also still trying to affect change within it.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about doing the consulting, is you're within a business, but you're still separate enough that you can be rebellious enough. And I find like my rebellious nature is actually what saved my life on more than one occasion. Because like you were saying, back to the story of, what do you want to do when you grow up, and who do you want to be, and what are the things you're going to do, and all that. And I remember telling my family I wanted to be a massage therapist, and they all laughed at me. like there's no money in that. Again, like same conversation. My dad, I love him to pieces. He actually adopted my brother and I growing up because my mom and my dad split when I was very young. And so he was the only dad that I had ever known. And he's a workaholic. He is straight up by me, and he will get out of his canoe and dig a trench every single time. And it kills me because he's just work, home, work, work,
Yeah.
home, work. That's it. That's all he does. And it saddens me because he's had multiple chances at beautiful families, but work is his life. That's it for him.
You know, what's interesting though is that when you can come from a place of love within yourself, you can see that when he says, right, this is something I didn't have as a child, but you know, for your situation, when he says, well, you know, massage therapy is not going to make any money, you can see, you know, and take a step back, like, oh, well, the only thing my dad knows is this, you know, this workaholic, you know, paradigm, and he probably wants to save me from that. He wants to save me from that pain. He wants me to have something better. It's not that he's trying to put me down. He's seen a lot of scarcity and a lot of fear, and he doesn't want that for me.
Oh, absolutely. It was always from a loving place. I didn't see that until later, for
Yeah.
sure. But no, it was awesome. And like every single, like it was get into nursing. Nursing's where it's at. And I'm like, I don't want to be puked on, thank you. I can't handle puke. Even with my daughter, as soon as she starts puking, I'm like, babe, come and deal with this. I can't handle it.
That's so funny.
And yeah, it's so funny. And then, you know, the only person that believed in me to make a go of it was my nanai, my grandmother. And she was like, baby, chase your dream.
Yeah.
Like you will never regret it. And I mean, I'm 17 years into the career and I haven't regretted a day of it. I just know now it's time to level up and have a bigger audience than an audience of one.
Mm, mm.
And it's I'm not honoring the medicine and the gifts within me if I don't step up outside of my treatment room, because my treatment room is my comfort zone.
Yes, yes, right. And that's where our intuition so often tries to pull us outside of our comfort zone so we can grow. And I had somebody share and this isn't going to be universal, I'm sure, but they shared a really interesting, you know, rule that you can maybe fall on uh, to tell between, you know, the your intuition or, you know, your ego. And the intuition so often is going to whisper and not yell. But not only that, but it's also going to try to talk you into doing something hard. So if you find yourself trying to talk yourself out of doing something hard, you're probably going against your intuition. But if you're trying to talk yourself into why you don't need to do that hard, well, that's your ego. That's you grooming your ego. Oh, my ego's right. And that's a really fascinating way of looking at the world. And it reminds me also of this idea that, you know, I'm a big fan of Jordan, you know, Dr. Jordan Peterson there in Canada. Somebody who, you know, people find you know, perhaps contentious. I'm not sure that I fully see that. Maybe a little bit. You know, I don't necessarily agree with his politics, but I love pretty much everything else outside of that. But he has this idea that if you're going to give something up, right? Say you decide that you're going to go work on a project. If you're going to give it up, you have to either choose something as hard or harder. Don't choose something easier. So that way, if it truly is that this is not right for you, well, then you're choosing something that's best for you to do instead.
I love that distinction. And the other one that I use for myself is if it makes logical sense and it sounds like, oh yeah, that would be great, run. Because our intuition and that it's not going to be logical, it's not going to make sense. And it'll be some random thing like you need to bake cookies and go bring it over to so and so's house. What? Because you never know what that connection is going to lead. And the universe has all these like points that it can guide you to, but it's a certain series of events of dominoes that have been set up for you. And that chain of dominoes can only fall when you hit that first one. And that first one is where maybe it's not going to make a lot of sense.
Yep.
And that comes from that. I read two books back to back, and so I've mixed them up in my mind. But Atomic Habits by James Clear
Yeah.
and The One Thing. And I loved The One Thing because it talks about how you can distill like a task list And they use this qualifying question of, what is the one thing I can do right now that would render everything else either unnecessary or irrelevant?
Mm,
And again, it leans back into that efficiency that we were talking about from the beginning. And so when you can do that, when you can distill things down, and that's what I talk a lot about with my teachings, even, is like, okay, I have this huge vision and idea. How can I distill this down? What is the common thread within this that I can pull that will make everything else come together in such a beautiful way for people? And so I love doing those things of, where's the domino, I can hit. And I naturally do that in my treatment room with patients, because I'm always looking at things and they're going, oh, it's pain in my shoulders, pain in my neck, and all this. And I'm like, yeah, but your torso, your ribs are just totally not doing well. Let's go there. What do you mean? Well, when did you injure them? And and you go back through their history and realize that they were in a quad accident and they winded themselves so badly. Now the ribs don't move. Well, you think of the musculature that attaches onto the ribs. I would conservatively say like 60 different muscle groups are attaching to your ribs that are going between your hips, your neck, your shoulder, and all these things. So why would I waste my time on the outskirts of things when I can get to the root of it
mm,
and have it domino the other way for you?
yep.
And so when I word it to patients like that, they're like, oh, I never thought of it that way. And it's like, yeah, well, here we go. Let's go.
Yep. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I had a client that came to me who had 5 impacted lumbar vertebrae, and it made her back just obnoxiously tight, which
Mm.
then she was complaining, as well as her right leg was very tight and painful, and caused knee problems as well. It's like, okay, that makes sense. And she wasn't really sure what I meant by that. It's like, well, these muscle groups are attached, right? These muscles, they weave around your body. So if your back is stretched in this really weird way, and it's tight in this really weird way, well, it's pulling on these muscles, and it's pulling on your quad, and your quad is pulling on your patella. In fact, the number one knee pain in the Army, probably in all the services, that especially if they do running on asphalt, is the tight quads. Because you do a bunch of running, run 6 miles, you don't do enough stretching. Well, what happens when your quads are tightening up? They're pulling on that patella, and as they're pulling on that patella, well, guess what? Every time you're taking a walk, well, you got your femur just knocking against your kneecap, and so now you start getting this chronic pain, built up, outside of smashing your joints on the asphalt, constantly, for
Yeah.
those hours at a time, and understanding just how things are interconnected. Right. That's something, again, coming back to the medical field. They're not allowed. There's not allowed to look at the system in a holistic perspective. It's always this, Newtonian, I flick this, this billiard ball, and this billiard ball, if it flicks something else, well, then, hey, gravy, because that means I can put you on another pill. And I remember specifically, I went and got a physical, and they were like, oh my God, you lost all this weight. And it was almost like high fives all around. It's like, yeah, I'm a rock star. Like, oh my God, look at your blood pressure, high fives all around. Yeah, I'm a rock star. Oh my God, look at your pulse is, such a great resting. But your blood work came back. Your cholesterol is a little bit high. I'd like to put you on this pill. Fuck you. Like, I was mad. And like, I made him feel bad, and it really wasn't his fault. And it was a time where I wasn't at my highest vibration, but it's just like, dude, are you kidding me? Look at every other thing of which I'm a rock star, but this one thing, and now you want to give me a pill, and it's statins that we now see that are complete garbage and don't actually work. And there's so many people quit using them because of the side effects, and the literature's out now. I was listening, I think it was Joe Rogan, 1979, if I'm not mistaken. There was a doctor on there breaking down the research. There's zero influence in mortality, zero in mortality when it comes to taking statins. And statins, you're reducing the risk of like a heart attack. And again, because it comes down to what to think instead of how to think. And that's where I find, again, your policies and procedures, and just how powerful that is. And because again, it can examine, okay, well, this is what I'm doing, but how did I do that? Right. So then it starts to train and get that mind and train in that how to think. And Sam, this has been such a fascinating conversation. I mean, you've got so much wealth to give. I feel like you and I could continue on and on and on and on. If people wanted to, reach out to you, and see if maybe, what it is that you teach might be right for them, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Definitely the website and contact me. But if we are Facebook friends already, totally hit me up with a message. I have email, my cell, everything is on my website. So it's sorry, my daughter in the background.
Okay, no worries.
uh it's sorry, culturalambassadorvernon.ca.
Cultural Ambassador Vernon.
Yeah,
Okay,
.ca.
perfect.
Yeah.
.ca. Awesome. Love it.
Yeah, because we're
And
up in Canada.
yes, hey, and I love my Canadian friends, right, just north of us. And I've helped, Canadians as well. And I love how, even if we do come from different cultures, again, like you were saying, just how similar we are on the inside. And do you maybe have any, I don't know, any final words of wisdom for people who perhaps they are, they're having a hard time finding the truth between their ego and their intuition, and maybe some words of wisdom on where they could start to tease that out.
The first place I always start is asking a question. And it can just be as simple as, is this really who I am? Am I being truthful? And when you can start by having an honest conversation with yourself, it's amazing the doors that will open up, because we always know what's truthful and what's not. You can't lie to yourself indefinitely without feeling some sort of feedback.
Yeah.
So if you're feeling feedback, and like when you first wake up and there's I call it this split second right before when you're just coming out of like your REM sleep and all that, and there's that quiet part of the morning and your eyes aren't quite open yet, but you can feel your body waking up. And right there in that moment, that's the truth. And that is such a point in time, because you're kind of still between the veils. You're still between the veils of your divinity and physical reality. So I love playing in that zone of asking questions and staying in that space as long as I can, to figure out when I'm in alignment or when I'm not, and what is my truth. And I can't tell you how many times I've woken up at 3:30 in the morning, and I use my note app on my phone, and I don't even know what I'm texting and what I'm doing. And oh, there's my daughter. All right.
Lucy.
This is Josh. We're just wrapping up. I love you. Have fun. I'll see you after.
That's
Mom life.
well, perfect timing. So the boss has
Yep.
come in and said it's time to go ahead and wrap up.
Yeah.
And so yeah, definitely good that I was taking the cues there. And well, I really appreciate your wisdom that you've shared. I agree with everything that you've been saying. I love the work that you've done. I love that you really, step into your authentic self, and seems like you really help others along that same line. And Sam, again, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of What Saith the Crooked Knows. And thank you so much. And may love and truth always guide your path.
Thank you very much. This has been such an honor to hold this space with you. And I feel like it's going to be the first of many interactions and conversations together.
Yeah, I would not be surprised. Would not be surprised in the least. That's fantastic. Well, to everyone watching, go ahead and comment, let us know what you liked. Go ahead and smash that like button, and maybe share this, and see if there's somebody else who could use a little bit of that orientation through policies and procedures of how to think and not what to think. Well, thank you as always, and everyone have a great rest of your day.